All right, I think we got it here. Hopefully you guys are seeing that, should be, right? Yep, okay, perfect. All right, well, we're gonna get going then here. So what we're gonna do is just similar to what Jason did with you guys last week. Is we're just gonna run through and talk about this, the buyer broker agreement. And actually just a couple of things that I'll add to it as we go through things today with this is just based on some of the current things that I am seeing take place within the market and within our own company, I guess I should say. It'd be along the lines of these, so anyway, so Zoe, just will you make sure to throw in the chat box first and last name? I don't know if you did already, but I don't see it. So anyway, I always want to start this class, and I'm assuming Jason probably started the buyer or the seller packet the same way. But with this up here, that this is a legally binding agreement, and read carefully before signing the designated agency brokerage. So always a good idea to point out for you guys to make sure that even the clients understand that this is a legally binding agreement that they are signing. And so because of that, it could be a scenario where we have to go enforce this in court or something like that, which we actually have a couple of transactions that we are working on right now that we're doing where we may end up in small claims court on one transaction because the buyer signed the buyer broker and then went and bought with somebody else. And so we may end up in court with that one. And then we have another one where an agent did a lease agreement, signed a lease, and the seller, or I guess technically the landlord, is now not willing to pay us. And so we've got our attorney writing up a demand letter for that one, which the one will end up in small claims court because it's about $11,000. The other one's almost $100,000 commission that they're not paying us on. So anyway, just a reminder, this is a legally binding agreement. Read carefully before signing. And then I'll point out a few other things that we're kind of going through right now and as a company dealing with some of the stuff that we'll go through on the buyer paperwork. So the idea of this again is just kind of going through and making sure you guys understand the contract. If you have any questions as we go through it, stop me and we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of cruise through this. So, all right. So the buyer broker agreement is entered into an effective. You're going to put in the date that you want it to be effective. So whatever date you're going to have that be effective, typically it's the day you're having them sign it, but it doesn't have to be. So you could put in a separate date there if you were wanting it to be a different effective date that you would put in there. Then it is by and between Century 21 Everest and blank the buyer. So the question I always like to ask here, just to get you guys involved, so either throw it in the chat box or unmute, is, although I got to turn the sound up or I won't hear you. The question is, what do you put there? How do you know what to put for the buyer's name there? Where do you get it from? I know that kind of seems somewhat basic, but there's logic to me asking that. So match.
Yeah, whatever name's going to be on the loan.
Good job. Yeah, exactly. And that's what Lindsay threw that in on the chat box as well. So yeah, that's the way I like to do it, is find out how they are going to be getting the loan, what names are on there. And those are the names we want to match there. So whatever they're getting the loan, the name, that's what you want it to be in there as the buyer for the contract. All right, terms of the agreement. Buyer hereby retains the company, including blank, which obviously is going to be your name as the buyer's agent. You're going to put that in as the authorized agent for the company. And then it's going to end at 5 p.m. on blank day, month of year. So now, next question on this one. How long do you do it for? How long are you guys doing your buyer brokers for?
however long you're willing to work with the client.
Okay, good. Lindsay, Zoe, what do you think? I guess I gotta pull my chat up here so you can see. So Zoe, 3 to 6 months, Doug likes 2 months, Lindsay said, okay. So, yeah, there's not a right answer on this. So typically on the listing side, I usually say do a 6 month. On this one, it's just really what Douglas said, it's however long you want to be locked in and committed to that client. I have seen a number of agents in our company that will do those for a year, that they'll put them out to be a year out. And that's fine. It's just also recognize that you're then committed to giving them those fiduciary duties, which if they want to go see a property, you got to go out and show them properties as long as they want to go see properties. So just keep in mind that part of it. So for me, I like doing more like when I get with the client, the question I always ask them when we get to this is, okay, how long are you thinking that it's going to take for you to then purchase a property? And that's what I want to then put in as the time frame, is I may go a month longer. So if somebody said, hey, I want to buy in the next 2 months, I'm probably going to do it for 3. If they said 3 months, I'm probably going to do it for 4, something like that. So there's advantages and disadvantages, I guess, is just keep in mind there's advantages and disadvantages to doing a long or a short time period. So hey, James, also, will you throw in the chat box, if you haven't already, first and last name, so that I have that for the class. So, oh, you did already. Never mind, I see it. Thanks. Okay, so anyway, so that's in terms of the time frame. And the main thing to remember on that is that you are then locked in to that time frame with your client to go and show them properties and just all the fiduciary duties that you would then owe to somebody as part of that. So I would just want to point that out in terms of the length of time, because again, like I said, I've seen agents put in there for a year, and then later on things go haywire with the client. And what I get maybe a little frustrated on is I get them the call from the client saying, hey, I want out of this buyer broker agreement. The agent then maybe doesn't want to let them out of the buyer broker agreement yet. They also, it's clear the client's probably not going to work with them. And so to some extent, we end up just holding them hostage, would be the way that the clients always say it to me, is that they're being held hostage by this contract. So I don't know, like I said, it's a balancing act. So just really, I guess for me, my main thing for you is just think about what you're putting down on there and what you want to be committed to in terms of the long term with the client. Okay. All right. And then the next piece of it, it talks about that it's until that date or the closing of the property. So if they close on a property with you, even though you may have done this for a whole year, once they close, this contract is done. So keep that in mind as well. It's either that date or the closing of the property, and it's whichever occurs first. Next piece of this is that you're going to act as their exclusive buyer broker in locating a property at, and then you're either going to, you're going to put in A in the county or counties that you're going to be looking at, or B located at, and then you're going to put in an actual address. So let me give you a quick story on this that I just saw, and we had to deal with as a company, a ethics complaint. So we had an agent within our company that what happened is they got a phone call from a buyer. The buyer said to them, hey, we want to go find some properties with you. So the agent goes and starts showing them properties, and she's out showing them a property in American Fork. While she's there and showing this property in American Fork, the buyer gets a phone call, takes the phone call. Our agent can hear that he's a little agitated from this phone call. And when he hangs up, he says, hey, apparently I already signed a buyer broker with somebody else, and I don't want to use them anymore. And so he gave a copy of it to our agent. Well, the agent from the other company had filled this out, and on this line right here wrote in Tooele County, or located at, and then listed the actual address of a property that they had written an offer on that they didn't get accepted. So now the question for you guys is this. What exactly does that mean then for our agent, the agent who signed it? So again, just they wrote Tooele County here, they put the address of a property in Tooele County. What are your thoughts? You guys are like, hey, I wish there were people in the room so that
You don't have a buyer broker, meaning that other agent in Twilla. If you were showing them houses in American Fork, you haven't done anything wrong. You're not encroaching on their contract.
Okay, good. And I would, go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say that client could enter into a buyer broker with our agent too. They
Correct.
could actually have both of them.
Okay, so now let me change the next step that happened on this. So our agent goes out and now starts showing properties to them outside of Tooele counties, which she already was in American Fork. Continues showing them properties. Well, then they decide we can get more for our money in Tooele. And so we actually now want to go look in Tooele. And our agent actually went and helped them and they bought a property in Tooele. So now go back again though, here's the question. On this, it was written Tooele County or located at a specific address in Tooele. And they didn't buy that specific address. So now what do you think?
I still think that buyer broker would stand because it's not, and it's either in Tooele County or located at this address.
Okay,
Yeah, that's how I think too. It would, the first buyer broker would fall into play on that, wouldn't it?
okay, good. So here's the
But I
thing.
also think they're messy when you start talking about, what's it called? The reason they bought.
Oh,
I can't remember what the timeline is, but
cause and stuff, you mean?
procuring interest.
Yeah, so so here's the thing on this. So now what I left a few pieces out that if you understood, you'd maybe change your mind a little because she ended up helping them buy a property in Tooele, but when the initial agent filled this out, which so this is where and again, this becomes a little bit maybe sticky, but when they initially filled this out, they put up here as the buyer's name, just the husband. Because he was going to be the only one on the loan, which back to what we talked about, makes sense that that's how you would do it. Well, what ended up happening though, is they went and bought in Tooele, but they bought in the wife's name. And the mother-in-law paid cash for the house. So does that change anything for you?
Yes, definitely.
Right. So yeah, and luckily, at the hearing that we had for the code of ethics on this, the panel agreed and said that our agent didn't do anything wrong. But just kind of, I guess, for me, I kind of feel like had they listed both the husband and the wife here, then the agent would have been safe. So even though I've said to you, put what's going to be on the loan, it wouldn't probably hurt if it's, as far as the real estate purchase contract, only put the name of who's going to be on the loan. But for the buyer broker, probably is not a bad idea to put a husband and a wife, even though it may be a scenario that he's the only one going to be on the loan. In this scenario, it probably would have made a difference. But there's another piece to this too that I want to make sure you guys understand. And that is by putting in Tooele County or located at, and then putting a property in Tooele County could make this contract a little bit ambiguous, meaning which is it? Is it to all of Tooele County or is it the property located at this address? And one of the things that typically is going to happen now, here's the thing, like I always want to preface what I'm about to say with anything could happen in court. So you just never know what's really going to happen. But as a general rule, if a contract is written and it's ambiguous as to did you mean this or did you mean that? The way that the court is typically going to look at it is however it was written, whoever wrote the contract, whatever would favor them in the contract is not going to happen. So meaning, because the agent wrote it out as Tooele County or located at this specific address, and the agent's the one who filled out the contract, a court would probably look at that and say, it's really only for that specific address, not all of Tooele County. But again, you never know, so don't make it ambiguous is really kind of the point that I want to make on it. But just know, if you ever are writing the contract and you're on the buyer side and it's ambiguous, the court will favor in whoever it would lean towards that didn't write the contract. They're not going to lean towards the one who wrote the contract. So anyway, there you potentially have an issue that way where you could argue that it was only for that, which, by the way, both agents at this hearing that we did over at the board, both of the agents said that the clients were hesitant to sign, and our agent said they would only sign the buyer broker for specific properties, which leads me to believe that's probably what they were trying to do with the first agent as well. So again, that's where it would come down to you could see why a court would look at that and go, okay, the agent maybe tried to slip one in by throwing all of Tooele County there. So anyway, my point on it though is do one or the other, and in the other one, probably put NA, I'm not a big fan of leaving blank lines. So if you're not going to do it, so if it was going to be a specific property under the in blank county, put NA on that line or vice versa. All right. Okay. That goes towards either the purchase or the lease or anything that they do that way. All right, next. And as I said, if you have questions, just stop me and we'll talk about them. But next, brokerage fee. So if during the initial term or any extension of the initial term, the buyer or any other person acting on our behalf acquires an interest in a property, then the buyer agrees to pay the company a brokerage fee in the amount of blank % plus certain dollar amount. Now, here's the other thing to point out on this that I'm seeing a lot of happen currently. And actually, part of where this came from, even when I first got my real estate license, we used to do this all the time. But is agents will put, I'm seeing a lot of one of two things starting to happen. Agents either putting 0% in here, or I'm seeing some agents start to write MLS. And their thinking is that they're saying that they're going to take whatever percentage is offered on the MLS is what they're going to collect. Now, luckily, because where the market is right now, this probably isn't as big of a deal, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands what this section means and how it works. So a lot of times agents are putting 0 in there because they're telling their client, and again, when I first started in real estate, we always would just sit down and we would say to our clients, you're not going to pay me anything. And so we would typically put 0 in there. But back then, pretty much every property on the MLS was offering 3%. It was very, very rare that you saw less than a 3% offered on the MLS. So it wasn't too big of a deal to do that, because this goes on to say, if the property acquired by the buyer is listed with a brokerage, the buyer agent commission paid to the company by the listing brokerage shall satisfy the buyer's obligation for the brokerage fee shown above, provided that it's not less than the amount shown above. Okay, so back then it was no big deal. But what have you guys seen? Like, what's the lowest you've seen offered? And like I say, today's market, not so much. Most of it is 2, 2.5, 3. But what's the lowest you've seen on the MLS being offered as a BAC?
The lowest I've ever seen is 2.
2%?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
$1.
I was going to say, I saw one. In fact, Douglas, you might have been the one that showed it to me, but
Yep.
There was one on the MLS listed by a company that shall not be named, but you'll probably know that they offered $1. So if an agent were to write in here 0 or MLS, then what that means is you're going to get paid. Oh, Lindsay saw 0.5%. Okay. So yeah, if you had put in their MLS or 0 and they were offering $1, you're getting paid $1 for selling that house. And so to me, I guess what I'm saying is figure out the amount that is kind of your minimum that you would be willing to accept and put that in there. For me personally, I'm still gonna stick with 3%, because you could always go back and do an addendum to this and change it. But I want to use this as an opportunity to have a discussion with my client about, okay. Typically, we're gonna get paid 3%. In the event we come across a property that is offering less than 3%. Ask them how they want you to handle it. Do you want me to not show it to you? Do you want me to try to ask the other agent to make up the difference, to pay that? It meaning through escrow instructions? Do you want to ask the seller in an addendum to pay part of this brokerage fee on your behalf? Or what do you want to do? Basically, have that conversation with them so that when you come across one that's offering $1, you can go in and say, look, I'm not gonna go and do this for $1. And the fact that I have taken you and shown you the property and all those kinds of things is not gonna work. So how do you want to handle it? And talk to them about it, okay? Now, the other thing I want to point out to you too, that we're starting to see more and more of too, is we recently changed this section right here where it says, talks about the brokerage fee. So the company that they would pay the company a brokerage fee in the amount of blank percent plus so many dollars. Now, we called for a long time this plus amount right here. We referred to it as an admin fee, or people will call it a transaction fee, something like that. Just recognize that we can't call it that. It becomes an issue when you call it an admin fee. So it has to just be basically additional commission. Now, the reason that's important is I see agents that will put on an addendum to the buyer broker agreement. So they'll fill this out and they'll put 3% plus like $4.95 or something like that on here. Then they decide for whatever reason, they're not going to charge the client that. And we see this on the list side as well, where they will come back and do an addendum saying company brokerage fee to be $2.95 rather than the $4.95. But just recognize if you don't address the percentage part and you just said brokerage fee to be $2.95, you're agreeing that the seller only has to pay us $295. And I doubt you want to do that, especially if you were on the list side. So anyway, anytime you address this, if you're going to do it on an addendum, something about the brokerage fee, it's a percentage plus the amount. So don't forget the percentage part when you're addressing it on an addendum. And or if you were changing it, let's say you found a property that was 2.5 and you were going to do an addendum saying we're only going to charge 2.5 on this. Don't forget to put the plus amount as well, because again, if you changed it if initially it said 3% plus $4.95, you do an addendum that says brokerage fee to be 2.5%, you just wiped out your $4.95 as well. So just as an FYI on that. All right, any other questions on the brokerage fee? All right, protection period. If within blank months after the termination or expiration. So what this is saying is that if within however many months after this contract expires, they are to go and buy a property that you showed them, we would still be owed a commission. So how long should we put in there? If within how many months? What are you guys doing? How much are you putting in there?
I usually put 3.
3 months, okay?
Mhm.
I'm putting unlimited months. If they buy that house 10 years in the future, I want the commission.
Yeah, so speaking of that, there are some companies going around that I don't know that we've seen this much in Utah, but outside of Utah, and our actually legislature just passed a law that basically would not allow you to do that for unlimited, basically. What this company is doing is going around and giving people $1,000, $5,000, and then getting them to agree that if they ever sell their house, they'll use them as their real estate agent because of giving them the money. Not a bad idea, but our legislature just passed a law that goes into effect, I think tomorrow actually, basically saying it's got to be a reasonable time frame. So anyway, FYI. So yeah, typically for me, just don't do 0. I actually did have one agent in our company that put 0 there. and then a buyer went and bought a home that they had shown to them right after it expired, like with a week after it expired, and our agent came and said, I should get paid on this. And when I looked at it, I said, unfortunately, you put in if within 0 months after, so therefore you're out. So the only thing that ours doesn't say that other, that like if you were using the one from the MLS, says that unless they've signed another buyer broker with somebody, and ours does not say that. So just know that they would still technically owe us. I don't think we would necessarily be able to collect on it, but just as an FYI on it. All right, next is the buyer representation disclosures. So on this one, this is where the buyer is warranting. And I always want to point out this first section here, because when you're having your client sign this, it's a good idea to have them be aware of this. So the first thing is that they're warranting to us that they have not entered into another exclusive buyer broker agreement with another brokerage that's still in force and effect. The second thing is that they're letting us know that the buyer, or we're having them know that they will, in all communications with other real estate agents, notify them that they've entered into this. So one of the things you want to tell your clients is, hey, anytime you talk to another agent, make them aware that you have already signed a buyer broker with me. So rather than waiting for the agent to ask, have you signed anything? Have them tell them, hey, I've already signed a buyer broker. And just let your clients know by telling them that that should have the other agent back off. And if they don't, then that would be an ethics violation. The other things that they're warranting is that they'll furnish us with relevant personal and financial information, that they'll exercise care and diligence in evaluating the property, and that they will hold us harmless against any claims as a result of them getting injured on a property, and that upon signing this, that they'll review our buyer due diligence checklist form and the wire fraud alert disclosure as well. And then also that they would disclose to us any properties that they have an interest in acquiring at that time. Okay. All right, next, agency relationships. On this one, I always just tell the client, hey, when we come across a property that you're interested in, I'm on your side of the table. So I always just tell them, I'm working for you. I'm on your side. We're not in competition with each other. I'm here to help you get what you want on this property. So I just make sure they're aware of that. Then section 5.2 is I just tell them, in the event though, that you end up finding a property that is either listed by me or someone else with Century 21 Everest, in that case, I would end up becoming a limited agent. And basically what that means for you is I can't take one side or the other. So I just always explain that to them up front so that if it happens, they're already aware of it. All right, next, professional advice. This one is important that you point out to them, and I'll tell you how I always do it, is when I'm sitting down with the clients and I'm explaining this to them, when I get to this section, I always just say, what this section says is don't trust anything that I tell you. And usually they'll give you kind of a confused look when you say that hey, this says don't trust anything that I tell you. They usually be like, what? And at that point, I tell them basically what it's saying is that I am trained in the marketing of real estate, that I'm not a CPA, I'm not a property inspector, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an electrician, I don't know any of that kind of stuff. And so if you have those types of questions, you want to consult with a professional in that area. Don't rely on me and what I would be telling you regarding any of that stuff. Now, well, I'll save it. I got a story for you on that I'll share with you, but I'm going to wait till we get to the due diligence form. So, all right. I'm moving on. So again, if you have questions, just interrupt me and we'll talk about it. Number 7, dispute resolution. This section, it just says that the parties are agreeing that if there is a dispute that arises out of this contract, that we would first go to mediation before going to court. And so that doesn't mean that the buyer and seller have to do this. That just means if for some reason they had a dispute with us, that they would first go to mediation with us before trying to go to court. Section 8 then becomes, in the event we do end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. So this particular section is had another scenario recently where the importance of getting this document signed with your buyers came about. So we had an agent that ended up in a lawsuit with a buyer that was a multiple offer scenario. The agent wrote the offer, so he was a limited agent on the transaction. As part of being a limited agent, he went to the seller and said, here's the scenario. The seller happened to know the buyer, didn't want to deal with him, didn't accept his offer. His offer was $5,000 higher than the other offer that the seller did accept. But the seller didn't want to deal with the buyer. And so as a result, they didn't accept it. Well, because the seller knew the buyer, didn't know him personally, but knew of him, the buyer sent a message to the seller through LinkedIn. And in the message just said, hey, I'm really disappointed of why, and I can't understand why you didn't take my offer, because I was offering 5,000 higher than any other offer you would get. Well, the agent or the seller, just trying to be a nice guy, replies back and says, yeah, it's unfortunate it didn't work out. And I can't remember exactly all he said, but gave the buyer the impression that, yeah, it just didn't work out and maybe I didn't have all the information or something like that. Well, as a result, the buyer then wants to sue our agent, and tries to sue our agent. Well, the bad news was, because we didn't have, our agent had a limited agency consent signed, but did not ever get the buyer broker signed from the client. And as a result of that, we could not then say, hey, you got to pay for our attorney's fees. So we did settle the contract, so we got it all taken care of. But we still had to pay attorney's fees, which were more than what we settled the case for. And the reason we couldn't go back is because our agent didn't ever get this signed. So without this signed and the agreement that, hey, they'll pay the attorney's fees, then you're going to have a hard time going back and getting them to pay your attorney's fees. So again, just another reason you want to get this signed. In the event we do end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to the reasonable attorney's fees. Okay. All right. Buyer's authorizations. So in this section, the buyer is authorizing us to disclose after closing to each MLS that we participate in the final terms and sales price of the property. They're also authorizing us to communicate with the buyer for the purposes of soliciting real estate to get us around the do not call. And the reason that we need the buyer's authorization on the disclose the MLS is because why?
Non-disclosure state.
Correct. So because we're a non-disclosure state, we have to get permission in order to disclose that. So if you ever have a client that doesn't want to, it is possible to not disclose, but it's not something that is done very easily, and it's not something we want to. There's got to be a pretty good reason for us to not disclose to the MLS, because again, just imagine trying to do a CMA if we didn't have the sold prices of properties. It would be very difficult. So, all right. The other thing that it says in this section, which we don't do right now, but it talks about us putting the earnest money into an interest-bearing account and then giving that interest that we would gain off of it to the Utah Association of Realtors. It's called UAR-HOF, the Housing Opportunity Fund. But we looked into doing that, but it was such a nightmare red tape thing that we just decided not to do it. So. All right, attachment. So the next section is there either are or are not additional terms. If there are, you'll check the R box. If there's not, you're going to do are not. Typically, when you first fill this out, you're probably going to do there are not. But then again, as I said, if you come across a property that's maybe offering something different on the MLS than what you have there, meaning less than, not more. If it's more, you're fine. You don't need to do an addendum changing it to 3.5% or 4%, but you would want to changing it down. Okay? Equal housing opportunity, that we're going to comply with all the federal, state, and local fair housing laws. So just keep in mind of that. I always like to point out that there are testers that will call you and see if they can get you to slip up on some fair housing issues. So just make sure you're always complying with all fair housing laws. All right, next section is the electronic transmission and counterparts. So on this, we're agreeing that we can use electronic transmission, so emails or faxes, which I typically always joke about. Some people have probably never even seen a fax machine, but we still have that option. But I actually sent a fax yesterday. Part of my income came from the state of California because we had an office there and I was doing training and stuff down there. Well, I was supposed to get a refund on the taxes that I paid to the state of California, and they have made it almost impossible for me to get my tax return. And I had to actually send them a fax yesterday. They would not take an email.
Because you're a boomer.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, so they wouldn't take any of that. So I sent a fax yesterday, believe it or not. So, all right, the other thing is counterparts, which again, where we're doing through dot loop, stuff like that, we don't have issues. But the counterparts used to be, you would fax it off, one to the husband, one to the wife, they would sign each of them and send it back. So you'd actually only have the husband's signature on one document, the wife's on another, and those would be considered counterparts, just so you know. We don't really run into it much anymore, so. All right, the due on sale clause. So this one is just saying certain types of transactions may trigger the due on sale clause. So there's two types of transactions that would trigger that. One is going to be if it's a seller finance. Two is on a lease option where it potentially could come about. This is one of those things where potentially I could see where we end up trying to do more seller finance things because people wanting to try to keep these low interest rates in place. And so in the event you ever try to do something like that, make sure when you get to this section that you're explaining to your client that it's possible on those type of transactions that a bank would call that note due and payable right then, which could really put them in a tough spot if you're working with a buyer on that. So just make sure you understand and you're explaining all of that to them. All right. Section 14 says that this is the entire agreement. So, and I just always want to point this out because a lot of times agents don't do all of this. It says this exclusive buyer broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist form, the wire fraud alert disclosure, and any other addenda, contains the entire agreement. So you really actually don't have a complete buyer broker agreement unless you get them to sign the buyer due diligence checklist form, the wire fraud alert disclosure, and then if there's any other addenda as well. Okay. And then after that, they're going to sign, you will sign on behalf of the company to put them into the contract. And then before we move to the next page, just always want to point out that it does say here, do you have a real estate need, a property to sell or lease outside of our market area or the state of Utah? Yes or no? So it's just always a good idea to ask people. And since Douglas is on here and he's my son, I'm going to try to get him some business. So if you have anybody that wants to go to Pocatello or Idaho Falls area, send it to Douglas because he'll take care of it for you. All right. He's still licensed here too, though. So, all right. So just remember to ask about that because you can end up making a little bit of money by referring somebody to somebody outside of our state. All right, next, buyer due diligence checklist. So we just talked about that's part of the buyer due diligence form now. Or sorry, not the buyer broker agreement. It's because of this last section that says that the entire agreement includes all of that. So, all right. Next is the buyer due diligence checklist. So you're going to put in the name of the company, you as the agent, and the buyer's name right there. And then again, on this one, I always just point out to people that I am trained in the marketing of real estate. So that's again where this is saying again, we're trained in the marketing of real estate. Either the company nor its agents are licensed or trained to provide you with professional advice. So then you're just gonna tell them. These items that are bolded here are all things that you might want to consider looking into. In terms of your purchase, might want to make sure you're aware of all of these things. Well, so now I told you had a scenario I was going to share with you. So I had an agent over the last week that's contacted me a few times, and the last one was actually even just an email right before we started class here. That what happened is he sold some land to some people. And one of the things you'll notice in this buyer due diligence checklist is it says buyers advise that depending on the present use, the property may be taxed as greenbelt. A purchase of the property may change the greenbelt status and the amount of property taxes assessed by the county. Such change in greenbelt status may also result in liability for rollback taxes. If the buyer has questions regarding the county property tax requirements, buyers advised to consult with the county assessor's office. So one of the items that's in here says that. Well, this agent helped them buy some land up by Heber. And in the process, though, on the actual contract, the buyer agreed, the seller wanted the buyer to pay all their closing costs, including any rollback taxes. So they agreed on the contract that the buyer would pay $21,000 in back taxes for this land. So they did. Well, now you fast forward a year later, because it's been a year since it closed, a year and a month actually. Fast forward now, and what's happened is they got their tax bill for 2022 in November, and they were still being taxed as if it's not greenbelt. Well, they were still wanting it to be greenbelt. But for whatever reason, and long story, it didn't happen. And so the agent now is coming back saying we as a company should help pay for part of that because it got messed up. And I'm telling the agent, no, for two reasons. One is you saw in the buyer broker, I guess really three reasons. One, in the buyer broker, it says that we're trained in the marketing of real estate. Don't rely on anything we tell you. Two, the buyer due diligence right here says this. Then we also have our company acknowledgement of buyer due diligence, and the one for land has a place for them to initial right next to where it restates this whole thing again, saying that purchasing the property could change the status. So we did disclose to them that that's happened. So again, just here's the main thing I'm saying is our agent, this agent, and actually he's not even with our company anymore, but the agent went and told them, he's now saying, well, it's kind of his fault because of some things that he said, which again, the purpose of this whole form is we're trained in the marketing of real estate. So it becomes very tempting when you're working with a buyer and maybe, for example, somebody comes along and they're like, hey, where's the property line on this? Well, you're not a surveyor. So I always preface it. That's why I always start when I get to that section in the buyer broker of saying to them, this says don't trust anything that I tell you. Then if they go out and we're looking at a property and somebody says to me, hey, we noticed, looks like the fence is right here. Do you think that's the property line? I always refer back to, remember that section where I told you don't trust anything I tell you? And they're going to say yes. Then I usually say, well, like it looks like this is probably where it is, but if that's something you're concerned with, you should check it out. You should get a surveyor to come and look at it. So for me, on that whole greenbelt and the taxes, the rollback taxes, to me on that scenario, them asking, hey, what is the scenario with this? Or I think what happened is the agent actually called the county and asked a few questions. Your job is not to do their due diligence for them. So honestly, it's way better to say, give them a call. Here's, what the phone number you should call to ask them whatever questions you have. Like you really need to distance yourself, even though it's this fine line between we want to give good customer service, but you also don't want to end up in a lawsuit or something where they're saying, hey, you owe me $25,000 or 26, I guess now on this scenario where they're going, hey, you owe us $26,000. Like that's not going to be something, especially on this one where I'm like, the contract said the buyer was gonna pay 21,000, like they agreed to it going in. So to my mind, that's off the table. Now you're talking about maybe this one difference, that little bit, but as we already pointed out, right here it says that the things could change on the property taxes with it being a green belt. So anyway, just make sure the client understands they need to check all this stuff out. Don't rely on you. Don't trust you if you do say something, because that's not what you are a professional. All right. Moving on. So here's our receipt and acknowledgement of the due diligence. And as I just mentioned, but I'll restate it again, we do have a separate one of these receipt and acknowledgement of buyer due diligence that is for land. And so if you're ever doing land, use that one. And the reason being is you can see on here, this doesn't have the property tax section, the receipt and acknowledgement of ours. So now we have where they've initialed right next to where it said the property tax. So I feel like we're in a pretty good spot if they did try to sue us to say, you know, we disclosed to you this could happen. So anyway, so on this, you're gonna have them go through and initial each of these. And the thing I like about this form is even back here on the due diligence, like you could look at it and go, okay, that's a 3-page form that's got a lot of information. Like the client could try to say, well, I didn't really read it, which by the way, one of the things that's important to know is by signing a form, is the buyer or the seller, whoever's signing it, your client, that is their acknowledgement that they have read and they understood it. So to come back later on and say, well, I didn't know, again, in court, a judge might fall for it and side with them, but technically, by signing this, they're acknowledging that they did read it and they do understand it. So, all right, next. I feel like we're cruising. You guys either ask more questions or we're getting out early. All right, no questions. We'll keep going. All right, confirmation of earnest money receipt. This should be filled out when you receive the earnest money. So you're going to put in the buyer's name, the buyer's agent, the brokerage, seller's name, seller's agent, seller's brokerage, the property address, yada, yada, yada. How the date, the contract, the offer reference date, and confirms that on whatever date that the buyer's brokerage received the earnest money. So you're going to fill this out. Once we receive the earnest money, you're going to check the box for how we got it. And just to point out again here where it shows wire transfer, notice that it says must be signed by the authorized brokerage representative. We don't want to take wires. It's pretty rare that we are going to take a wire, which is the whole reason it says must be signed by the authorized brokerage representative, is we're probably not going to take a wire. So typically we want to get personal check, a cashier's check, or some other way, and side with, well, the other way would be earnest, I guess. So just kind of as an FYI that that's what you're going to do. And then you're going to sign, put down what your position is. You'll so print position and sign that you received the earnest money. All right. Next is limited agency consent. So again, on this form, the limited agency consent, you're going to use anytime you are representing a client where the other side of the transaction is listed with Century 21 Everest as well. So since we're talking buyer side here, if you're working with a buyer that purchases a property that is listed by Everest, you're going to use this limited agency consent. And if it's your listing, then you'll fill it out accordingly for that. So you're going to put in the name of the buyer, name of the seller, the agent representing the buyer, agent representing the seller, the name of the company, and the property address. Then down here, you're going to either check that there's one agent. So if you're representing both sides, you're going to check the box for one agent. If there's two agents, so both within Century 21 Everest, you'll check the box here, put the name of the seller's agent, the name of the buyer's agent, and then everybody's going to sign it. Only one agent needs to sign this though. So if there is another agent from within the company and you're filling it out, you can sign it or they can sign it either way. All right. Any questions on limited agency?
Russ, so you had mentioned in another class, we can also use the unrepresented buyer disclosure form instead of this one. Is that right?
So if you're gonna use the unrepresented buyer form, then yeah, just make sure that on the rep C that it shows that that buyer has no representation as well. So just don't make it confusing. So that scenario I was talking about with the green belt.
Uh-huh.
The agent is actually saying, well, we represented both sides on this. We actually didn't because they signed a for sale by owner commission agreement on the listing side, even though the agent initially on the contract put themselves as a limited agent. They later on then did fix it. But yeah, so if you're gonna be acting as a limited agent, make sure you use this. But yeah, if you're gonna have them sign the unrepresented, then just make sure you don't give any indication anywhere that you are representing them in the contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. All right. Next then is the wire fraud alert disclosure. So just remember, you want to use this on every transaction, but specifically with your buyers, make sure you take the time to explain to them the what's going on, that they're going to probably get contacted by somebody trying to get them to wire the money somewhere else. And not that this isn't related to what this wire fraud alert, but just since we're talking fraud, I want to just reemphasize that there is a bunch of land fraud going on. Like almost weekly, I have somebody within our brokerage come and talk to me about someone contacting them that wants to sell a piece of land, and they need to hurry, and they're from out of state, and they need to do everything electronically. So just anytime you get that, it's a red flag. So just yesterday I had an agent come in and say, kind of a little fishy, just feels a little off. What do you think? And I said, 100%, like it's not going to probably be legit. So just keep in mind, I guess, the amount of fraud that is out there, and just make sure you're telling your buyers, don't wire to anybody, anything without verifying, like almost to the point of like, go to the title company, be sitting in their office when you authorize the wire. I mean, and you don't really need to be to that extreme, but to some extent present it to that extreme, because again, if they end up wiring the money, it's gone. And it'll probably kill your transaction too, unless they happen to have more money to complete the purchase. So just make sure you're filling out this wire fraud alert. So it's provided by Century 21 Everest, including you as the agent to the buyer, and then have them sign that they're aware of it. So again, the idea of that just being, if for some reason they go and do something stupid and wire money somewhere else, they can't come back on us saying, oh, well, you didn't tell me. All right, next, affiliated business arrangement disclosure. So you're going to fill this out. You're going to put the client's name up here, the property address and the date. And the reason we have to do this is for RESPA requires, because Inspiro Financial and North Star Title are sister companies to Everest, we have to disclose to the clients that two things. One, you're not required to use the listed service providers. And two, that there are frequently other settlement service providers available with similar services. They're free to shop around. So just keep in mind, them signing this is not them agreeing to use either Inspiro or North Star, even though we would love it if they do as a company. They don't have to. It's just we have to disclose, if they do end up using them, that they are a sister company of ours. Okay. All right. Next is the disclosure and acknowledgement regarding lead-based paint. So question, when do we use it? If I have a property built in 1978, do I need it?
No,
Okay, so when do I need it?
Anything built before 1978.
Good. Prior to
77 and prior.
Yep, so anything prior to. Now, is it gonna hurt if you do it? No. And one of the things I always point out, like I used to do a lot of bank foreclosures, and I would help the banks sell their foreclosures. And even if the property was built and completed last month, they would use the lead-based paint disclosure, just, so there's no harm in using it, but it's required if it was built prior to 1978. So on that, again, you're gonna put in the address of the property. And since we're talking the buyer side here, I'm gonna kind of skip through this. I'm just assuming Jason covered the seller side. So on the buyer side, they're acknowledging that they've received copies of any of the information from up above. That they have received the pamphlet, protect your family from lead in your home, so just make sure you're sharing that with them. On any property built prior to 78, just in Loop, we've got that pamphlet, share it with them. So that they have the copy of that, and then they're gonna initial either that they're gonna take a 10-day opportunity. Or that they're gonna waive the opportunity. Now, in the event they check or initial the box for the 10-day opportunity. You also have to then include the lead-based paint addendum. So just remember, lead-based paint disclosure is required. Lead-based paint addendum is only used if they're gonna be testing for lead-based paint. If they're not gonna test, you don't need the addendum. But if it's built prior to 78, you always need the disclosure, okay? So addendum is only if you initial here. If you initial both boxes, again, this becomes confusing. And so the staff is gonna say, well, we need the lead-based paint addendum then as well. So. And then you're gonna have the buyer sign that. All right, last form. We are gonna be fast today. So unless you guys got questions. So last form is the commission agreement or commission instructions. So this is how you're gonna get paid. So the way you're gonna fill this form out is if you're using a transaction coordinator, you don't even have to fill it out. They'll do it for you. But if you're not, you're gonna fill this out. So you're gonna put in the address of the property, the buyer's name, the seller's name, the title company. And then, oh, let me back up. This form is an Excel document. And so you have to fill it out in Excel, but then after that, you have to print it as a PDF to upload into Dotloop. You can't upload an Excel document into Dotloop. So in the Excel though, this is a drop-down box that you can click on. So you could change it to commercial versus residential. So you would use that. Next, you're going to put in the selling price of the property. This is a drop-down again that you could click on, and you're going to either have it be net, gross, or a flat amount. So however the commission is going to be calculated, you're going to select that. So typically, well, just whatever it shows on the MLS, gross or net, you're going to put that. The commission that's being offered, you're going to put in there. If there is a commission outside of that, you're paying a referral to somebody outside of our company, you're going to click on this and then it'll open up a box over here that you'd fill out who that commission, the referral is going to go to. If you did a commission advance, you click on this and put yes. Just keep in mind the commission advances are like payday loans, like you're going to pay huge amounts of interest on that. So it's not something I would recommend doing. We do have one right now, an agent in our company that did a commission advance, and then now the agent's disappeared. Can't find them anywhere. So kind of interesting thing. I don't know what's going to happen with the commission advance because it's not from us. It's a different company that they got 10 grand for, and now the agent won't return anybody's call. So just leave that as no, is my recommendation. So the Century 21 admin fee collected, which we probably need to get that updated now that I'm thinking about it. Maybe it is, and I haven't seen the new one, but because again, this is just part of the brokerage fee. And so you're going to put in how much you collected there. So $295 or the $495, whatever it is. If the earnest money is being held by us, you'll put in the amount that the earnest money is in there. And then if you gave any credits at title, you would put that in there. And then that's going to give us, here's what the check from the title company should be. So if you filled this top part out correctly, when we get a check from the title company, it should be for this amount right here. Okay. And just kind of as an FYI on it, if we were holding, say, $1,000 of earnest money here, the title company, the check from the title company would be $8,295, not the $9,000. Because what ends up happening is we transfer that earnest money over from the trust account to the operating account, and that becomes part of your commission. So, all right, Next, and down here, you're gonna fill out the commission to the agent. If you're on a team, you would click this drop down box and select team. And then it'll open up another box just like this off to the side here. But if you're just single agent, you're gonna put in your name there as the single agent. It's gonna then deduct the $295 that goes to the company. So you'll notice up here it was $9,295. Once that's subtracted out, now the agent's base commission is $9,000. You're gonna put in what your split is. So if you were on a 70-30, you're gonna put in the 30% goes here. The Everest portion of the split goes in there. It's then gonna calculate the franchise fee of 6% off the commission. It'll deduct the admin fee. So if you didn't collect it up here, you would end up paying for it right here. It would put in $295 to deduct it from the commission. So again, just if you don't collect the $295, you end up paying it down here. If you want to donate to the company foundation, the recommended is $21. You can change this to whatever you want. If there's a transaction coordinator fee, you'd put it in here, but if you're using a transaction coordinator, they should be filling this out, not you. So if you're filling it out, you probably should be putting 0 in there. Otherwise, you're doing their job for them. If you are, and then again, their name would go in there. So this would then come up with, here's what your commission amount is going to be. And is it direct deposit? Yes or no? Is a drop down box here. So. All right. Really quick one today. Any thoughts, questions, comments? All right, thanks for being here. So Thursday's class is, we're doing the Jeopardy game. That's the last part of this class. So there are 2 different Jeopardy games we do. One's for the mandatory residential, one's for this one. And I don't know how we're gonna do this, because if there's nobody in person, I usually always really beg and plead people like come in person to that class. So that we have people here and it makes it more fun. I don't know how we're gonna do it since you guys are all on Zoom, but we'll figure it out on Thursday, and we may just have you do it individually, and I'll have some type of a gift for you guys that whoever wins, I don't know, we'll see. I'll figure it out by Thursday. So anyway, thanks for being here. See you on Thursday, same time, and we'll go through and do the Jeopardy game. So talk to you guys later.
Thank you, Russ.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.